yesterday, but we want to go ahead and celebrate that and talk about would the real St. Francis please stand up? And that is, there's so many myths and so many facts surrounding this well-loved saint that we all, really seem to, we want to learn about his life and model after his life and really, adopt a lot of his qualities. And this is why today on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie, it's so vitally important that we discuss the truth about St. Francis of Assisi. I'm Debbie Georgiani, along here with Jerry Usher. And Jerry, is St. Francis one of your favorite saints?
I think everybody loves St. Francis. I have a statue of him in my backyard. And the thing about St. Francis is, Debbie, as you know and many of our listeners know, he's kind of one of those saints that crosses all sorts of boundaries, different religions, people who think, all sorts of different things, have different values and so forth. I think what makes him that way, of course, is because he was just so humble and really just, ill, what's the name they call him? Il Poverello or something, the poor one. And for some reason that resonates with a lot of people.
Absolutely. It's funny you said that about having the statue. I actually have a beautiful statue of St. Francis of Assisi on my fireplace, and then my husband has one on his office desk because he absolutely loves St. Francis. And we were in Assisi 2 years ago, and it was just probably the best portion of the pilgrimage we went on because we absolutely love. I mean, there's something about St. Francis, and to think, Jerry, that he lived in the late 1100s. He died early in the 1200s. I mean, only living to 45 years old, but yet all these years, people, and we know Pope Francis took the name Francis after St. Francis of Assisi. How exciting is that?
It sure is, and we invite you, our listeners, to call if you've got maybe you've got your own St. Francis story, a devotion to this great saint, or perhaps, you've heard something, read something somewhere, just wanting to know, is this true or not? Because, sometimes, Debbie, how saints, these legends kind of raise up around certain saints. He did this, he did that, miracle was attributed to him, or different, versions of their calling and how they sort of abandoned, left behind the world and started following the Lord. So we just invite our listeners to call. Our number is 1-800-585-9396, 1-800-585-9396.
I think often, Jerry, about the quote that is attributed to St. Francis of Assisi where it says, preach the gospel always, and if necessary, use words, or use words if necessary. And that was attributed to St. Francis of Assisi. And yet we know, and this is what we're going to get some clarification on because we're going to hopefully bring an expert on really soon to help us with this. But I know that it was attributed to St. Francis when in fact it really was never said by St. Francis. However, after researching St. Francis of Assisi, I realized how that quote, which is used so often in, Christian teaching and even in religious education, I realize now that his life absolutely modeled and mirrored that quote exactly when you look at his whole entire life. So it's interesting how certain quotes can be attached to a certain person, never having that person having said the quote, but it's interesting how his whole entire journey reflects it. This is pretty cool. I'm excited to learn the real deep thoughts and feelings of what St. Francis really was, how he viewed life and how he viewed Christianity and how he viewed other people. I'm fascinated by this one, Jerry. I hope our listeners are as well.
Yeah, I hope to hear from you. Take Two with Jerry and Debbie, 1-800-585-9396. We're going to bring in right now for part of the program someone that, if you're familiar with EWTN radio or television for any length of time, you know him, Bob Lord. He and his lovely wife, Penny, God rest her soul, they have done so much. They were absolutely pioneers in Catholic media, filming DVDs and audio recordings on so many of the saints for many, many years. Bob, it is just a great joy to have you on with me, Jerry Usher, and Debbie Georgiani. How are you, Bob?
Good. How you doing, Jerry? I didn't know you were with EWTN. I'm really happy to hear that. Before we ever did a program on Francis, we used to spend weeks in Assisi just taking in all of Francis, everything that had to do with Francis. We would speak to the priest and the brothers there about who he was, and everyone had a different take on who Francis was. He's amazing, amazing character, and he did have a lot of depth to him that maybe we don't even think about. I mean, I'd like to think about, when he was young and he came from a very well-to-do family, and because he could play 7 instruments, he had to get into a war, and I know it was really important to his stature in the Bernardoni family, and so he had to get into a war. And the first place he went into a war was a town that today we say is about 10 miles from Assisi. He was taken prisoner and got sick and was sent back home, and he was just kind of there waiting for what it is that he was supposed to do. And at one point he went to the church of San Damiano and he looked at the cross and he said, "Lord, what do you want me to do?" And when you look at a lot of the things in Assisi, you see that quote in Italian and English and other languages, "What do you want me to do?" And he said, "Stay here until I tell you what has to be done." And he did, and that's when he became, he said to him, "Build my church, which, as you can see, is in disrepair." And so Francis took him literally, and thought he had to rebuild churches. He started to rebuild the church of San Damiano, and he rebuilt another church. He rebuilt the Pavarello, and it was given to him. He wouldn't take it, but it was given to him by the Benedictines because they didn't want it. And he rented it for a barrel of fish a year, but he wouldn't take it. He wouldn't take anything. He didn't want any kind of possessions, and that's part of what the interesting thing about Francis was. He started to use his father had all this material that he would import from France, and Francis felt that this would be good to use and sell, so he could buy materials to build a church. Of course, his father had a fit, and took him before the court, the bishop, in the middle of the center of town. And Francis took off all his clothes and stood there naked in the town, and he said, "I am no longer the son of Pietro de Bernardoni. I am the son of Jesus." And the bishop covered him with his cloak, and if you look at one of the paintings in the upper basilica, you see the hand of God pointing down to Francis. And that was the beginning of his community. But he never wanted anything. His community had to be the friars minor. Minor means the lesser. After he had all of his friends joined him, had to also go in the center of town and give away all that they had. And it was very difficult, and the parents of these young people wanted to kill him. He was a dirty word in the Assisi for a while. So at one point, they had 12, and they decided to go to Rome and speak to the Pope about getting his approval. And it was basically just the gospel. What is it that you want to do? I want to live the gospel life. And they had the meeting with the Pope, and he looked at him and he says, "You can't do that. You can't live on the gospel today. Go and pray on it and come back to me in a few days." Right. And after he left, one of his cardinals said, "Your Holiness, if you tell him that you cannot live on the gospel, then everything that we are doing is fraud." And so the Pope went to sleep and had a dream, and in that dream, he saw the church of the 14th century the 13th century being held up actually by two friars. One of them was Dominic and one of them was Francis. And so when Francis and his 12 came back a day or two later, the Pope remembered that this was one of the friars that was going to build this church and saved it. And so he gave him his permission, and based on the gospel life. Now, as Francis and his friars left, they were leading I don't want to say corrupt church, but they were living completely different from the gospel. I mean, there was a tremendous amount of luxury in Vatican at that time, and so the friars were saying, this is not really what we're bought into. We gave up everything, and now the church that we want to aspire to live for is a corrupt church. Right. And so, Francis, that's what he said to them. And it's basically, what we say a lot of times when we have problems with the church. Mm-hmm. We say, well, what is it what do we focus on? Who are we? And he said, we are the friars minor, the lesser brothers. And very often they say, I don't know what to believe anymore. I'm hearing so many different things from the church. What can I believe in? And we always say to people, focus on the Eucharist. If you can believe in the Eucharist, no matter what happens, focus on Jesus in the Eucharist. And you'll
Amen
be okay,
to that.
because that's where it's at, is Jesus in the Eucharist.
Yeah. Hey, Bob.
Anyway,
Bob, can I ask? This is Debbie. Can I ask you a quick question? We have to go to a break. When we get back, if you could just stay with us just a little bit longer, because I just want to kind of run down a couple points about St. Francis going back to the beginning before his conversion, and if you could tell me if we're correct or not, if we're on target with how we are perceiving St. Francis, that would really help. And then, but I know
also this thing about him never saying, preach the gospel, and if necessary, I have a feeling that he did say that. Because I remember, I think I wrote it in our story, and that became a big thing and it is with Franciscans, and it is like when you go to Steubenville, they talk to you about that. I really have a feeling, if he didn't say it, it was said by one of his friars, and it became a Franciscan thing.
Right. That's exactly what I had read too, Bob. Okay, so we're going to take a quick break. When we get back, we're just going to kind of go back to before the conversion of St. Francis so we can get a better idea. And we're going to ask our listeners to please call in and be part of this St. Francis of Assisi discussion at 1-800-585-9396. You're listening to Take Two with Jerry and Debbie, and we want you to stay with us. So hold on. We'll be right back.
Get an insider's look at the latest information from EWTN. Sign up for Wings, EWTN's weekly email newsletter. Get the latest information about live events, special features, and guests. Connect with EWTN on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Just go to EWTN.com and click on the Wings link to sign up. Don't miss a minute of all that's happening at EWTN. Get your wings today.
This is Patrick Coffin. Join me for Catholic Answers Live. It's 2 hours dedicated to Catholic apologetics and evangelization. Designed for Catholics and non-Catholics alike, it's your opportunity to hear from and talk with some of the leading apologists and theologians in the church today. You've got questions? We've got Catholic answers. Catholic Answers Live, weekdays 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
This is Cardinal Sean O'Malley, Archbishop of Boston, Massachusetts. Thank you for listening to the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Take Two with Jerry and Debbie on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. We are blessed to have Bob Lord with us here. Bob has got to go in just a few minutes, we understand, so we'll just keep him a couple more minutes. What would you like to weigh in on here, this discussion with a real St. Francis? Please stand up. So much is known about him, so much is speculated, a lot of it correct, a lot of it inaccurate, but just what a great saint he was. Do you have a devotion to him? Maybe you are trying to live your life after the model of St. Francis. How's that working for you? Share your take with our listeners at 1-800-585-9396. Debbie?
Okay, so Bob, I'm going to run down a list of what during online research it's saying that can be attributed to St. Francis of Assisi, and then I'm going to run down the whole list. When I get done, if you could tell me which parts were accurate or which are way off base. Okay, so first of all, he lived in the late 1100s. He died at either 44 or 45 years old. And he was, his family was very wealthy. They were merchants, very wealthy. He was actually born with the name John. And then his dad changed it to Francis, the Frenchman. And he was very much of a rebel, a partier. He liked, he liked the limelight. He really, he had an aversion to grotesque things. That's why when he met the leper on the road, he really had to challenge himself out of that feeling because he was repulsed by the leper. And then he also, really, I kind of lived the world completely. He really lived in the world. Okay, and then he had this conversion, like you were talking about San Damiano, when God spoke to him, and he took it literally and thought he meant rebuild the actual church, and he rebuilt that church with his own part of it with his own hands, I understand. And then, okay, good. So we got it so far. So then he, and then after he had his conversion and he realized it was the greater church that he was really, it was his mission, he went on to live this life where he really tried to make poverty a holiness in poverty. And
he wed Lady Poverty.
He what?
He married Lady Poverty.
Okay.
If you look at the lower basilica in Assisi, you'll see the marriage of Francis and Lady Poverty, and so and it's symbolic, of course. But he devoted his entire life to Lady Poverty, and so everything he did and everything the brothers did had to do with poverty.
Okay, interesting. And so then let me ask you this question: so we know he received the stigmata, the wounds of Christ, and also the sword wound in the side. He received that as well. Is it true, Bob, that he died when he was blind? And is it true that he I guess it is true. He never became a priest. He only became a deacon.
He was a Eucharistic minister. Possibly a deacon, but never a priest, no.
Never a priest.
He did not feel worthy to be a priest. This guy, when he finally changed his life, he became so humble. And he asked that same humility from all of the brothers. One of the big problems, the reason that he went off to Mount Alverna was because the brothers wanted a community more like Dominic's, where they were accepting gifts from the outside, and they had real estate, and they lived a really nice life. And he would say to them, "God bless Brother Dominic, why don't you go and be with him? This is what we do, and this is what we're based on." But Brother Elias, who was very close to him, eventually took over the community, and Francis was weeping at this one meeting that they had where it was decided that they would take gifts and they would take property, and so he went off with two of his friars to Mount Alverna and just asking them, what's going on? What happened here? This is what you told me to do, and now they've taken it away from me. And he went there for 2 days, I think, or 3 days. No, actually, until he went from, I think, the Feast of the Assumption to the Feast of St. Michael the Archangel. But around somewhere in the middle of that, one morning he was sitting on a cliff on the mountain, and as he saw what he thought was the sun coming up, it was getting so bright, so it had to be the sun. And he looked up, and it was not the sun, but it was a seraphic angel, and it was Jesus in the form of that angel giving him the gift of the stigmata. And so he bore the wounds of Jesus, and he headed back to Assisi. And as he started to get closer, he could hear all the arguing going on about those who wanted the new rule, those who did not want it. It was the rule of 1223. Those who wanted it, those who didn't want it. And so he said, I didn't do what I just did. I didn't experience what I just experienced to come back to this. So instead of going to over to the Porciuncula, he went to the San Damiano, to where the nuns were, where Sister Claire was, and he stayed with her, and he lived on the balcony because he was very, very proper, and he wasn't going to live with the nuns, but he would stay on the balcony, and the mice would bite at his feet at night, and it was there that he wrote the Canticle of the Sun. Mm-hmm. Beautiful, beautiful canticle. It was in that setting that he wrote that, and this is where, for the last 2 years of his life, his body started to fall apart. He called it Brother S. He says, if there's one thing I've done is I have neglected Brother S. And so everything started to fall apart. He did become blind because he had these terrible corneal abrasions, and everything scratched. It was like something was scratching at his eyes. And so the last 2 years of his life were a tremendous amount of suffering. And,
right.
But he still was who he was.
Right. Bob, I know you've got to go, and I have so many more questions to ask you, and I know Jerry does as well, but I just wanted to just ask you these last 2 points before you have to go, is that he had I think the thing that, Take Two with Jerry and Debbie is all about taking a new look, a fresh look at life. And St. Francis, we hear all the things that, that his love of nature, the way he could communicate with the animals, the way he preached to the birds. We understand all that. We've seen all that. We've watched movies about St. Francis. I think the thing that is really interesting and the angle that I would love to approach, and I'd love to hear from our listeners at 1-800-585-9396, is that he had such an extraordinarily secular life.
Right, at the beginning, yeah. At
the beginning, yes.
Right.
And then all of a sudden he makes a complete 180, Bob, and changes.
Okay, so it started out actually, we're going back to the beginning. But, I said that he had to find a war. He needed to have a war because he had the best suit of armor. He had the best horse. His father gave him all these things, and this is what he wanted for his son, to be a knight. Because, the father, although he was very rich, was not nobility. So in the town of Assisi, he was a merchant, and that did not really count for a whole lot. He wanted to live his life through his son. And so his son went off to war, and he blew it. And he's very sick in this prison. And he has a dream, and there's a big castle. And he pictured the castle as being a place where he and other soldiers would have instruments of war, and they could win battles. And the Lord said to him, this is not a place for instruments of war. It's a place of instruments of love. He said, I want you to go back to it. So, and that's where he actually said, Lord, what do you want me to do? He said, I want you to go back to Assisi, and I want you to just wait on my word. And he went back to Assisi, and he started to just be he got this friar's thing, which he actually was a pilgrim's habit, that he traded with a pilgrim on the road from what it was.
Hey, Bob, hold on right there. We got to get to a break here just for a second. I know you had to go as well.
I got to go now.
Yeah, thank you, Bob, for being with us. We appreciate that. Take Two with Jerry and Debbie, 800-585-9396. Coming right back.
One of the most terrifying experiences in life is teaching your teenager to drive. My daughter has this tendency to focus her attention right on the hood of the car. You see, she thinks that by focusing on the car itself, she'll keep it going in the right direction. Of course, there's no surer way to crash. Thankfully, she's slowly getting it. You only get where you want to go by fixing your eyes far ahead of your car. When you do that, you end up steering in the right direction. That's why worship is so important. We need a focal point that's far beyond ourselves to give us perspective and to keep our lives heading in the right direction. That focal point is the majesty and greatness of God. Try starting each day with your favorite worship song. And when you pray, don't just ask for stuff. You might end up more stressed than when you started because you sat in the presence of your problems and forgot the greatness of God. This is Chris Stefanik from reallifecatholic.com.
60 Seconds with Mother Angelica.
The good news is that as we struggle and God pours grace into us and we correspond and we rise and we fall, rise and fall, God in His infinite mercy loves us, keeps us going, gives us strength and courage and joy. Joy. Be joyful. Go on, smile. It won't hurt you. Even if you got a problem. Even if you got a problem. Smile at your neighbor. I want you to remember a little sentence. And the sentence is this. You may be the only Jesus your neighbor will ever see. I want you to know your dignity. I want you to know how great you are before God.
The people you know and trust are on EWTN.
We are so glad you're with us. It's Take Two with Jerry and Debbie on EWTN. Our phone number for you to get in on this conversation about St. Francis. Will the real St. Francis please stand up? 800-585-9396. 1-800-585-9396. The Feast of St. Francis really was yesterday, although, Debbie, when a feast falls on a Sunday, then
right.
Usually, obviously the day of the Lord, the Lord's Day, takes precedence over that. But do you have any special ways of celebrating the Feast of St. Francis when it comes around?
You mean in our home?
Yeah, you and Marty, or...
Yeah, well, the reason why I say that is because, a lot of the church that we go to, obviously does the blessing of the animals and so we have different practices to honor St. Francis of Assisi. But yeah, in our home, we actually have our statue. We move our statue to a prominent place of St. Francis of Assisi during his feast day. And I just, I take great comfort at it. The statue is so beautiful. It has the doves, the three doves, St. Francis holding two of them and one on his shoulder. And, it just his keen sense of nature and how he communicated. I know there's that myth about the wolf in the town that was next to St. Francis that was eating people and terrorizing people, and St. Francis communicated with that was the myth or whatever. I'm not sure if it's absolutely the truth, but he did have an intimate way of communicating with the animals. And I mean, I guess when he got frustrated with human beings, he used to go out and preach to the birds and they used to listen to him. And apparently another myth was that, the birds wouldn't fly away until he told them to fly away. So I think that is really interesting. Now, do I think it's possible? Absolutely. I think when God gives gifts to people who are going to move towards him, and St. Francis shed his former life and moved towards him in a very, very strong and powerful way, I think God enables people and gives people gifts like that are far beyond, they're supernatural. And do I think it's possible? Yeah, anything's possible with God. So that's why I think St. Francis is so loved. I know we love him. My husband and I just are crazy about St. Francis of Assisi.
Yeah, he's one of those saints that kind of crosses lots of different borders, as we talked about before. So what is your St. Francis story? Maybe he has helped you out in some way through your praying to him interceding for you. 1-800-585-9396. Again, we talked earlier about how, we are all called to live a life of simplicity and, in a sense, espouse ourselves to Lady Poverty, as St. Francis did. How do you do that in your own life? Do you follow his model and inspiration in maybe working with the homeless or at a soup kitchen or just giving to the poor? How do you emulate St. Francis in any way in your life? 1-800-585-9396.
Jerry, can I say something about that? Because you just brought something really good about it. For St. Francis, when I was doing the research on him, it was talked about that he talked about why it is so easy and freeing to be in poverty because you don't have to protect it. You don't have to have any type of, military presence around you or guns around you to protect what you have if you don't have anything. So there's a huge freeing sense of not having to protect even the clothes on your back or anything. And I think that is a very unique way at looking at poverty. It's looking at poverty in a freeing sense as opposed to an oppressive sense. And I think he mastered it. He had a great, and he could master it, Jerry, because he came from a rich family. So he knew what it meant to be rich. And he actually chose to free himself because that was a burden to him. It wasn't that that's where I think this would be a good angle to ask our listeners how they feel about it. It's not about trying to be quote unquote poor. It's about freeing yourself from the trappings of life and materialism. So it's a really interesting angle. I hope our listeners jump in at 1-800-585-9396.
All right, some have joined us, and we're going to go first to Rich, who is in Grand Forks, North Dakota, listening on Real Presence Radio. Rich, welcome to Take Two with Jerry and Debbie. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Good deal. What's your take on St. Francis here, Rich?
I'm reading this fantastic book that came out in 2008, St. Francis of Assisi and the Conversion of the Muslims. And it took place, this book basically takes place during the Fifth Crusade, which was about 1220. And Francis, of course, went to the Sultan of Egypt, who was a great Muslim leader of many nations there. And he actually converted the Sultan to become Christian, and he wanted to be baptized. But St. Francis was actually there for about a month. And but he couldn't be baptized yet because if the Sultan was baptized Christian, then his Muslim clerics and so on would get his army together and would kill him. But so the Sultan gave St. Francis a paper that would protect him no matter where he went in the Middle East, so he could travel through the Middle East and try to convert Muslims to Jesus. And so about 10 years later, and Francis had died now, God told Francis to send a couple of the Franciscan monks to the Sultan in Egypt to baptize him because he was on his deathbed. So the Sultan, the missionaries went to Egypt, baptized the Sultan, and then he was Christian when he died. And luckily, he was smart enough not to become Christian before that because he could protect Francis as he went through the Middle East trying to convert Muslims.
Rich, I'm glad you shared that because I actually read that as well. And I did not know that after Francis's death, that the Franciscan friars went to the Sultan and he was baptized. When I had read it, it was left with what you said about the Sultan couldn't convert to full Christianity. He kind of converted in his mind and heart, but he couldn't actually make the leap because he would be murdered. And that's where I left it. So I did not know that it was confirmed that he actually did become Christian. So that's very interesting. But I had read that as well, that Francis it was put upon his heart to travel to Egypt, to go ahead and really try to, shed some light on what was really happening with Christianity and to really help. And, Francis, that was a bold attempt. And I mean, look how God protected Francis through this Sultan. I think that's amazing.
Fantastic book. Everybody should read that.
What was the name of the book, Rich? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
St. Francis of Assisi and the Conversion of Muslims. It's written by Frank, let's see. Frank, I can't remember what his last name is.
Okay, we could find it.
Yeah.
Very cool.
It's on Amazon. Frank Rega, R-E-G-A.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for sharing that. I'm glad you did. That is very important, especially in this day and age with what, even what we're dealing with right now in our culture. I think it's important for us to go back to see what bold and courageous steps that Francis took, especially working with people of other religions. So that was great take on that, Rich. Thank you for calling in.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye
See you later, Rich. Thanks for the phone call to Take Two with Jerry and Debbie. Our number, 1-800-585-9396. Your St. Francis take, day after his feast day, and maybe you go to a St. Francis parish. Maybe you've got a real special devotion to. Maybe you were named after St. Francis, and that has just kind of drawn you into relationship with this great but poor little humble Franciscan, the founder of the Franciscan order, and maybe you want to just share some aspect of your relationship, your spiritual partnership with St. Francis that will inspire our listeners. 1-800-585-9396. Let's go to New Bedford, Massachusetts. Zita, welcome to Take Two with Jerry and Debbie. You're on the air next. How are you, Zita?
I'm okay. How are you today?
Doing fine, thank you. Appreciate the call.
No problem. I just wanted to let you guys know, 9 years ago, more or less, I have a story to tell you about St. Francis. I always pray to him if my animals are, sick or something's wrong. So I always had a devotion to St. Francis and St. Anthony, because I believe St. Anthony was one of the followers of St. Francis also. So whenever I pray to St. Francis, I always pray to St. Anthony also. And I was, my baby wasn't even 1 year old yet. And I was looking for my little dog that she got lost. She was so tiny that she went through the fence. I couldn't find her. I looked all over the place. I couldn't find her. I was so scared that she was going to be lost and the kids were going to get home and they were going to be upset. So I ran around to look for my little dog, and I couldn't find him. And I saw a mail carrier, and I asked her, and she said, yeah, I saw somebody took the little dog and brought him to the shelter. So I called the shelter, and nobody heard nothing about it, and I was all, kind of crying about it, and something touched my heart, and to go around my area, and I went, grabbed my baby, and put him in the car and start going looking for the dog. And I just was frustrated, and I just stopped the car somewhere, and I stopped praying, and I started praying to St. Francis. And I told him, and I was praying with my heart, and I told him, would you please help me to find my little dog before my kids come home? Because I know, I'm not supposed to be attached to earthly things, but it's God's creation, and I was talking to him like I'm talking to you. And what happened, one thing led to another. I saw another mail carrier, and something pressed in my heart to go talk to them. And, I went there to go talk to him, but I didn't want to go, but I went to go. I said, I'm going to go talk to him. I talked to him, and, he knew exactly where the doggy was, and he led me to the house that the person had the dog, and a few minutes right before my kids got home.
Oh, my goodness.
So I believe, and I felt a presence, and every time I prayed to him, I always prayed to St. Anthony, of course. So I prayed to St. Francis, and I prayed to St. Anthony for them both to get together and pray for the situation. And I believe it was a big miracle, and I believe with all my heart, because, I got home, and my kids came home, and they were I told them the story. They didn't believe me. I'm nobody believed me. So I'm really excited that I'm very devoted to Saint Francis and Saint Anthony.
Praise God. Zita, so we have something in common, because St. Francis of Assisi and St. Anthony are two of my favorite and have helped me during when I went through cancer in 1994. So I can relate. So I do believe you. And so that's awesome. But I'm just curious, what is your dog's name?
Her name is actually Princess Fiona, but my little one couldn't spell Fiona, so we're calling her Fifi.
Fifi. Okay. Well, that's got, at least you got the F there, so that's kind of like Francis. That's kind of cool. I was going to say you could rename the dog. Yeah, that's kind of cool. I love that. Great story, but that gives us, another insight, because I'll just tell you what, St. Francis of Assisi, he had such an incredible love for God's creatures, God's creations. And like I said earlier in the show when I was talking to Jerry, I mean, here's the thing that's so unique is that that's not going to stop once, he's a saint. I mean, that's only going to continue. That's what everybody, I think, it always frustrates me, Zita, that people always think that, okay, when this world, ends and we go into, hopefully heaven, it's a whole new, completely separate. No, it continues on. It's all part of this amazing story that God has crafted for all of us. And so that's why, that's the intercession of saints is so important. And that's why the Catholic Church gets it right completely. And him interceding for you in your time of need, I think is a beautiful story, and it inspires all of us to rely on our saints more often. And so thank you for calling in to Take Two with Jerry and Debbie. And, you give us that just gives us joy and hope. And I love that. So thank you, Zita.
Zita, appreciate the call. We're going to get our final break here taken care of right now, and then a lot more of your calls to get to. Take Two with Jerry and Debbie on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. Our number, 1-800-585-9396. Will the real St. Francis please stand up? It's a day after his feast day, but hey, why not talk about this great saint who's loved by so many? 1-800-585-9396. Please stay with us.
Check out EWTN's official YouTube channel.
Just follow the link on our homepage at EWTN.com or go to YouTube.com/EWTN.
Watch EWTN's live shows or today's homily from the Daily Mass.
Click the upload button to see our most recent clips.
You can also find all of EWTN YouTube content by clicking the playlist button.
It's all on the official EWTN YouTube channel at YouTube.com/EWTN.
Visit today.
What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic?
Why can't women become priests?
I don't understand why I have to earn salvation.
How is it possible that God created everything?
Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest?
Why is the Catholic Church so unwilling to
The Catholic Church is too rich.
Catholics worship Mary and are committed.
As far as I'm concerned, all religions are equal.
You are called to communion with Dr. David Anders. Today, 2 p.m. Eastern, on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Hello, this is Cardinal Donald Wuerl of the Archdiocese of Washington, and you're listening to the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Your listenership, your calls, your takes are what drive this program. So we thank you so much for being with us. And without further delay, right back to your phone calls. Doug is in. Doug, you got to help me out here. Owatonna, Minnesota. Was I even close on that, Doug?
Yeah, Owatonna. That's right. Yep.
Owatonna, Minnesota. Cool. What part of the state is that?
Oh, southeast.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you. Listening on Sirius XM 130. What's your take on St. Francis today?
Yeah, I think his main message is to alert us to the love of money. I think the Bible says the love of money is the root of all evil. Not money itself, but the love of it. And a couple other reflections of Scripture. I think it's Proverbs 8. One day I was kind of drawn to the proverb that says, "Don't give me so much that I forget I need you, Lord. But then again, don't give me so little that I have to compromise my values just to survive." So in there, it seems like there's some kind of a dependence on God's providence, that we need something to get by. But once again, not the love of that, and that being the primary thing in our life, primary driving force. And there's another scripture somewhere that says, those who have much never have an abundance, because they always want more, and those who have little never have any, real need. So
somewhere in there, it's there's kind of a balance that this all gets me thinking about.
Hey, Doug, you made a lot of good points, and we actually did a show called Love of Money. It was a few months ago. Well, not a few. We haven't been on the air a few months, but if you go back, look at take2show.com if you wanted to, if it was any interest to you to listen to the archived show, Love of Money. We just really talked, talked about how so many things in our world today are being driven by a real, I think, just a lust for money, let alone love of money. But yeah, this balance that we need to strike, it's a trust, it's a dependence that God is going to provide everything that we possibly need. I know, Debbie, I'll let you comment in a second here, but Doug, I remember earlier in my life, there were things I got into. I looked at multi-level marketing things and this and that and whatever, and I thought, man, this is just going to be a way for me to just make, piles and piles of money, and, I won't have any worries or anything, and be able to drive whatever car I wanted. And the more I've learned and grown, hopefully, God willing, a little bit in the spiritual life, I look back and I say, God, thank you, that all of those things pretty much bombed, because, I never have attained wealth. I'm comfortable in the sense that, I know my bills are going to be paid, but, I really do thank God that I never got to the point of not feeling that dependence on him because I had too much. Debbie, you probably can share any number of comments on what Doug said.
Well, I'm so happy Doug weighed in on this because he really gives us a different perspective and a very eye-opening perspective on money. And I used to teach a class on abundance, and I wanted just to echo what Doug has to say, and it's very true, everything you said, and you quoted scripture, absolutely. Well, first of all, I just want to say, let me just sidetrack for 1 second. Multi-level marketing and network marketing can provide very nice incomes for people. So I think what, if I may say, Jerry, what you were trying to say is that kind of get rich quick thing of maybe that's an enticement of some of those organizations. But no, but multi-level network marketing actually provides a lot of people very good income. But I used to teach a class on abundance. And abundance starts with trusting God, and it starts with a dependence on God. And then that's where the abundance comes. And money is part of that because, obviously we need some kind of form of money to pay our bills, to live, to survive, right? You need money. It's a tool in order for us to be able to live in this world. And but if you go back to that, if you focus on money and money is your only focus, and you try to expand, then I think what you were saying, Jerry, like, oh, that would be so relaxing and so comforting to know I had, an abundance of money and not to worry about things. When that's the focus, or when you're thinking of that, which is human nature, which is complete human nature, then you lose sight of where God is asking us to truly trust him. And when you trust him, the abundance will come. It's so natural, it's unbelievable. That's why you hear of people who tithe or give even more than a tithe, a tenth of their gross. They end up being blessed like hundreds of times over. And it's like unbelievable. And they can't give away the money quick enough because the money keeps coming back to them. That's exactly because of their trust level. So I think Doug brings up a beautiful point. I think St. Francis clearly showed us that there is you don't have to be attached, and that love of money, you don't have to be attached. Unfortunately, like his family and his neighborhood was before he made his conversion. So I'm glad Doug called in. Thank you, Doug, for sharing your take with us.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. And yeah, of course, my point was, again, not so much having the money, but I guess God knows who's going to be able to handle it well and who couldn't. And I guess I'm just sort of pointing an accusing finger at myself, saying, it'd probably be better off if I never found myself in that situation. But Doug, thank you for calling. We're running short on time. Going to get to whoever we can here before the end of the program. Raphael is in Miami listening on EWTN. Raphael, welcome to Take Two with Jerry and Debbie.
Hey, Jerry and Debbie, thanks for taking my call.
Anytime.
With Pope Francis recently coming here, I know there's been a lot of talk on, the importance of serving the poor as Christians, and I'd like to propose that I believe that what we're being called to is a more direct contact with the poor as opposed to bigger government programs, because I know that if you have a lot of politicians saying, well, we have to increase more programs so we can best serve the poor, but yet I think that we're having a disconnect with the poor by increasing government, and yet we're being driven, I think, more to like that hands-on approach, kind of like, today's gospel of the Good Samaritan. It's, it's that, meeting Jesus face to face as opposed to, giving money to the government. I think that's kind of like the last resort, which is really the principle of subsidiarity, that we have to be more at the local level as opposed to the big government levels.
I totally would agree with you, 100%. First of all, I love your name, Raphael. I just love your name. I could say it 1,000,000 times a day. Anyway, but besides that, I just wanted to say I agree with you 100% on that, because I believe that as Christians, we are called to that human one-on-one contact, just like Mother Teresa did. It's exactly, be Christ to others and the poorest of the poor. Be there, be that Christ's hands and feet, and to connect. And I think that really speaks volumes if we do that, if we lower the walls that we have around us, some of us, and we go out into the world and really be Christians instead of just say we're Christians. So I would agree with that. You Jerry, I'm curious what you have to say.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Pope Francis talked about. He told the church's priests, go out and get the smell of the sheep on you. In other words, go out and be with them. Hug them, hold them if they need that, feed them if they need that, take them the gospel, be their friend, be present to them wherever they are. And I think, Raphael, it's probably, in fact, this is going to have to be our last call of the day, unfortunately. Those of you others waiting on the line, I wish we had more time to get to you. But, yeah, my takeaway would probably be right in line with what Raphael said, Debbie, and that is St. Francis, I think the core of what he shows us is really, if we're passionately in love with God, we're going to give up everything. And that doesn't mean necessarily not having a nice home or lots of wealth or whatever. It's just really, where is our heart? And then what do we do with the material resources that God gives us?
Yeah, and I would think my takeaway is I know my takeaway is that for St. Francis of Assisi, for me, is complete freedom. He freed himself from all of the attachments of this world, and in that he found the pure heart of God, and he intimately knew God, and I think that is so beautiful. Tomorrow, Jerry, oh my goodness, I am so excited about tomorrow. Are you already dreading the holidays? That's tomorrow's show, Jerry.
What?
Are you already dreading the holidays? I know Christmas music is already playing in the stores. I know.
Yeah, we haven't even gotten into close to really to Halloween yet, and still the holiday, quote-unquote, holiday message is bearing down on us. But the topic tomorrow is going to be about a lot more than that. Sometimes there's a lot of stress around holidays, the activities, the family gatherings, and so forth. Are you already dreading that? So, Debbie, we look forward to tomorrow.
Yeah, until then, have a beautiful and blessed day.